Anything Ghost Podcast, number 311.
The haunted forest is busy tonight. This is Brink Stevens.
And Rod Matsui. You are listening to Anything Ghost,
The most frightening podcast online.
Pleasant dreams.
Pleasant screams.
Welcome to Anything Ghost, everyone. This is episode number 311. And I don't have a lot of stories from listeners this time around, but we'll make do. And let's just get started with episode number 311. And this is from Michelle in the U.S. Bedroom Demon. While living in a room of a house with two other roommates, a friend spent the night over on a weekend eve. I gave her my bed. I was sleeping on a low floor-level trundle bed placed perpendicularly next to her bed, so my feet were facing her side. In the middle of the night, I was startled out of a deep sleep by her yelling. I sat up in my dark room. Then I shockingly saw an extremely black, flitting shadow fighting with my friend. She was fighting and punching it, and it was flitting in quick jabs toward and away from her. I was paralyzed witnessing it in a state of shock and terror. I was able to yell at it, "Hey, get away from her!" It stopped, looked at me, then attacked me. I have never felt bone-chilling cold like that as it brushed over me. It was hovering atop of my head, but then I was covering my head with my arms and had my eyes closed as I felt this angry, cold presence start trying to saturate into me from the top of my head downward. I was desperate to get it off of me. I faintly heard my friend yelling, "No, get off of her." In a flash of an idea, my atheist self immediately said a prayer, and I saw in my mind's eye a picture of a kind being with his hand outstretched out in front of him, as if to protect me or ward it off. And it worked. The evil being slowly removed itself. I lifted my head, opened my eyes, just in time to see it fly up into the ceiling, and the room warmed back up again. I immediately went to my friend's side to console her, and she told me what she had experienced and seen before I told her my own view and experience. Previous to this, I had been a devout Catholic convert, but a staunch atheist. But I am still not religious. Yet I went from staunch atheist to being agnostic. And by the way, my other roommate also heard us that night. And that was from Michelle in the U.S. And she sent me that some time ago. And I don't usually do demon stories and things, but, you know, being that we're kind of short on stories, and it was a fun story to read. And thanks again, Michelle. And the next story is a self-narrated story from Rod in the U.S., Los Angeles, actually.
Hello again, Lex and Everything Ghost listeners. This is Rod in Los Angeles again. I spoke to one of those filmmakers a few weeks ago, the one who lives in the haunted house in the hills of Glendale, where the mountain lions roam. His haunted Glendale house has calmed down, he says, and there have been no strange noises heard there recently. This fellow lives a mile away from the place where a somewhat famous record company once existed, called Sounds Records, and they put out some of the earliest vinyl Halloween sound effects records, both 12-inch LPs and 45 singles. That was back in the early 60s. They sent a photographer around Los Angeles looking for photos of a spooky house to use on their record covers. And he found the perfect house in the Hollywood Hills. This was the Rollin B. Lane mansion. And the same week he found the house and got permission to photograph there, he found it was being renovated and turned into a private club for magicians. This club was to be called the Magic Castle of Hollywood. Now, I have to consult the books here for a minute because I've been researching these types of things for a while now. I wanted to talk about the poltergeist in Samoa. This story is simply called A Samoan Poltergeist, and this was documented by Reverend John B. Stair, and takes place in Samoa, of course. His book was published in 1897, and A Samoan Poltergeist is an account of strange happenings that occurred while the Reverend was in residence on the island. The hut that his family lived within was often plagued by unexplainable sounds at night. For example, the sounds of invisible people rolling invisible balls or large oranges back and forth along the hallway. Visitors to the house would hear the sounds while trying to sleep, and would ask Stair the next morning who had been making the continual loud noises. And they were startled to hear that the Reverend could not explain the noises, but that they were of nightly occurrence and evidently the work of unseen or ghostly visitants. Sometimes the phenomena occurred outside the house, as on one occasion when a bell hanging from a tree began violently ringing in view of a full group of people who could all plainly see there was no one near the tree or the bell. And the tree was even closely inspected to determine whether there was a string attached anywhere. Even while being carefully examined, the bell continued to ring loudly until abruptly stopping. Throughout the Reverend's stay on the island, there was never any explanation for these mysterious events. I visited the Whaley House Museum in San Diego back around 1995. And while I didn't see any ghosts there, I was hoping to, but no. I was upset. I was frightened by something the museum owners had done. Many of the upstairs rooms contained priceless artifacts and were sealed off behind windows of plexiglass that covered the entire doorway. So you couldn't go into the bedrooms, but you could look inside and see what they looked like approximately 200 years before. And while walking down the hall, I looked into one of the rooms and was startled to see someone standing inside the room, and that person had no face. It was a dummy, a mannequin with a blank white face and white arms and body in the shape of a woman. After a moment, I realized it was only a dressmaker's mannequin wearing an antique housekeeper's dress. A couple of years after that, I read about the Phelps Mansion for the first time. And the accounts of this haunting surprised me because they involved what seemed to be a ghost who could build reasonably good dummies of people using the clothing of the occupants and stuffing the clothing with other pieces of cloth, much as a person might construct a fabric dummy. And the ghost would leave these lying around the house creepily. Now, some people are creeped out by mannequins anywhere in the first place. The Phelps Mansion had theirs constructed by something from another plane. Now, there are several Phelps Mansions in the United States, and I'm pretty sure there's more than one haunted one. This specific one is in Stratford, Connecticut. There is a reasonably good description of this case in Dennis William Houck's book, Haunted Places. This haunting is distinguished by a certain variation of the poltergeist phenomena, namely the spirit or whatever it was constructed dummies that resembled the family members. And it did so while people were in the house but occupied with other things. Sometimes the mannequins would be constructed while the family was outdoors and they would come in to discover them. But over a period of approximately 6 months, dozens of these weird effigies would be found in the house, sometimes arranged in positions of devoted prayer, and sometimes the dummies were clearly laid out on a table or a bed under a shroud, like a cadaver might be presented. Since the family believed someone might be sneaking into the house and causing the weird events, they hired a man to patrol the house at night, armed with a pistol and a lantern. The neighborhood was loudly informed that anyone breaking into the house and causing mischief would be doing so at his own risk. Throughout the night, the man kept his watch, moving from room to room, encountering nothing strange. When the sun came up the next morning, however, the main room of the house was seen to be filled, once again, with the uncanny dummies. So there seemed to be no way of discouraging the phenomena. It did whatever it wanted and seemed to enjoy taunting the family. Other typical poltergeist phenomena accompanied this haunting: objects moving by themselves, unexplainable noises, and so on. But I have never heard of a ghost with such artistic talent as this one. Kind of unusual, isn't it? Anyway, thank you again, Lex. Have a good evening and take care.
And thank you, Rod. That's Rod in Los Angeles. The next story I'm going to share is from April of 1923 in London. And it's more or less, I guess, pretty much is, or was, a poltergeist activity. And it's called Ghost Mystery Baffles Authorities in London. In 1923, there was an 8-bedroom farmhouse that was owned by a fruit farmer named Joseph Scrimshaw. The house sat in a lonely area outside Gorefield, Cambridgeshire, England, with a broad ditch separating it from the roadway. It was at that time, in 1923, that the owner, while living with his invalid 82-year-old mother and his 16-year-old daughter, began to have ongoing paranormal activity in their home. Mr. Scrimshaw explained some of this activity. About 11 p.m., his mother called out to him and said that her lace caps had been thrown from a nightstand and onto her bed. His daughter Olive slept in the same room, and she witnessed the caps flying around the room. While they were telling this to Mr. Scrimshaw, there was a loud crash in one of the unoccupied rooms. He rushed in and found that a washstand had fallen over. Then, a washstand in his own bedroom fell over. As soon as they picked them both up, they fell over again. Mr. Scrimshaw went over to fetch a neighbor, and as they approached the house, they heard furniture falling. They scrambled inside and picked up the furniture, but soon it fell over again. The following day, Tuesday morning, there was a loud crash in the dining room. No one was in the dining room, and upon investigating the noise, they found a large table had fallen over, and one end of a piano in that room had moved about 2 feet from the wall. Later in the morning, there was a noise in Mr. Scrimshaw's bedroom. They went into the bedroom to find the washstand had been moved to the other side of the bedroom. That afternoon, a cupboard, a weather glass, and a filter were all found to have fallen, and by evening, A table and gramophone in the dining room fell, and the washstand in Mr. Scrimshaw's bedroom moved again, this time to the other side of the bed. In fact, that entire night, furniture was moved about within the house. On the following day, Wednesday, things were no different. In the morning, a clock fell off a nail, and a heavy marble clock fell off the mantelpiece. His daughter Olive and her grandmother were so upset that they stayed in their beds. But while Olive was lying on her back, books would be thrown from the table onto her bed. By the end of the day, Wednesday, all of the dishes and the glassware in the pantry were smashed. Other events included pictures and ornaments falling over, while the string holding the pictures was unbroken. 2 times that week, the piano fell over. A constable came by to help them put the piano back upright. Several people have come by to watch the house, but no one was able to see when something was thrown over. Whenever Olive and her grandmother were upstairs in the bed was when things were thrown about. One neighbor stayed the night and said that in the early morning hours there was a rumbling sound in one of the bedrooms, like that of heavy furniture moving. And at that exact moment, they heard Scrimshaw's daughter Olive utter a sharp cry. Olive, though, declared she never made a noise and slept soundly that night. News of the bizarre activity at the farmhouse piqued the interest of locals and eventually reached the ears of paranormal professionals and spiritualists. Paranormal investigators and spiritualists showed up to investigate the strange happenings. The investigators were astonished to see the broken dishes and furniture when they arrived. Once there, they held seances, kept all-night vigils, and questioned Mr. Scrimshaw, as well as his 82-year-old mother and his 16-year-old red-headed daughter, Olive. The Scrimshaws all told the investigators that the haunting events would stop for a while, but then would begin again and again. Both Mr. Scrimshaw and his daughter said they did not believe in ghosts. During a seance, as rain poured down on a February evening, spiritualists Hugh Racy, Henry Stimpson, and Mr. and Mrs. Taylor announced that there were several spirits in the home. One of them, a tall, dark man with very black hair, clean-shaven, and a ruddy complexion, who was wearing bandages around his head, was believed to be the spirit who was moving and destroying things in the home. The psychic, Mr. Lacey, added that this same spirit used to ride a coal-black mare horse, and that he was believed to be a man named Dick Turpin. One researcher said he believed the activity was related to the deaths of Mr. Scrimshaw's father 11 years prior, or perhaps to Mr. Scrimshaw's cousin who had passed 2 years ago. Mr. Scrimshaw told the press, "I had never had such a relative. I'm a churchman, and I don't take stock in ghosts and seances." As news of the farmhouse spread into the media, famous author and paranormal enthusiast Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the author of Sherlock Holmes, wrote a letter to Mr. Scrimshaw. He had some advice that included Mr. Scrimshaw send his daughter away from the home for a while, suggesting that his teenage daughter, Olive, may be an unconscious agent of forces from the psychic world. And I got all this information from old news articles, but I did a quick search online, and I found another website that was telling the same story. And then he did a little more investigating, he or she, I think it was a he, but he said that, not sure, I think in the same year, 1923, in May, one of Mr. Scrimshaw's workers who lived on the farm died in a smoke. He was smoking in bed and killed himself, basically, I guess. And after that, all the hauntings stopped. So, I still think it was kind of a poltergeist thing, but maybe the death of this guy that they were close to kind of broke off the poltergeist energy. And that was his theory, and that's what I thought as well. And then there was another theory that the daughter I didn't mention, she owned 14 cats. Some people said 7, but she said herself 14. So a lot of people were saying maybe the cats were knocking things off of tables and etc. But a cat's not going to knock over a piano or our dining room table. Oh, and the website for the gentleman, I got the information about the worker that died smoking in his bed. That was a website called paulweatherhead.com, and you'd have to go through his articles to find this. But yeah, if you want to read about it, head over there or listen to this again. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. And I don't have any more stories to share, so I hope you longtime listeners don't mind. I'm going to share a popular episode for any new listeners so they can get an idea of what Anything Ghost is all about. So if you like this story coming up and these stories that we shared today, be sure to join the Anything Ghost VIP group. It's a one-time membership fee, and you have access to every single ghost story from Anything Ghost dating back to the first day in January of 2006.
Hi Lex, this is Libbie from Seattle. I have emailed in a couple of stories in the past. One of them, which I guess is appropriate to the season, was about the Seahawks ghost who messed with my dryer after I turned off the Seahawks game. And the other was about the weird shadowy figure that my husband and I saw on our first date while I was messing around with a bike. Maybe some of your past listeners remember those stories. Anyway, I thought I would try my hand at recording one of my other interesting paranormal stories, since I always really like hearing your listeners record their own stories and send those in, even though I think you do a fabulous job of narrating all the stories that they email in too. So this story might be my earliest paranormal experience that I can remember. It was back in 1999. I had recently graduated from high school and had just taken a job. I went to high school and grew up in the Seattle area, and I had taken a job up in Ferndale, which any of your listeners from Washington probably know. It's up north of Bellingham, kind of near the Canadian border. So it was a little bit of a move away from me for being as young as I was. Well, I had just moved into a little apartment I was renting up there, and had some of my friends come up from the Seattle area so that we could have a little housewarming party. And we decided that we would like to rent a movie and watch it as part of the festivities. So I jumped into the car with my friend Devin, and we set out to try to find a video rental store. So if you've never been to Ferndale before, let me describe it for you a little bit so you know the setting of where this story takes place. It's the town itself is a really small town, but it's surrounded by just miles of flat, open, rural farmland. So it's kind of in a valley type of setting, so you can kind of see for a long way. The roads are very long and straight. You can see cars coming and going easily, and there's not a lot of mistaking what you see out in a landscape like that, where there aren't a lot of hills or mountains or anything to kind of mess with your perception. So Devin and I were driving along the road, heading in what we thought was the right direction to find the video store, and we realized at some point that we were actually going the wrong way. Since I was new to the area, clearly I didn't really know what I was doing. So my friend Devin, I love her to death, but she's never been the best driver, she said, "Oh, we're going the wrong way? Well, oh, that's fine, I'll just turn around and go the other direction." And she cranked her wheel around and flipped the car in the other direction just as fast as you can. I mean, without signaling, without slowing down, anything. And as she turned kind of into what would have been oncoming traffic, I saw these two huge headlights. It looked like a truck coming straight at us. And I screamed. I was like, "What are you doing?" I remember pressing my hand up against the window like I could stop the truck or something. And when I screamed, it scared her, and she kind of wobbled the car around a little bit, and it went off the road and sort of caught on the chassis with the wheels not making contact with anything, sort of hanging off the pavement, and there was about an 8-foot drop in front of the front bumper into a ditch below us. It was very scary. It's the closest thing to a car accident I've ever been in, and I hope I'm not in anything else like that in my life. So we were sitting there just kind of hanging off the road in this suspended car, unable to clearly go forward or back, even afraid to just like shift in our seats because we didn't know if we were going to overbalance the car and fall down into this ditch and wreck the car up or what. So she kind of turns to me and is like, "What were you doing? Why did you scream like that? You're so stupid. There was no truck there." And I was like, "Yeah, there was. There was a truck coming right at us. It almost hit us. It must have just barely passed us." And we looked down the road in the direction that I thought the truck would be going, and there was nothing there. And like I said, these roads just stretch forever. Very straight, very open landscape. There was no vehicle that had passed us, and no vehicle coming toward us either. And we just kind of looked at each other, and she said, "I need a cigarette." She rolled down her window and started smoking, and I was like, "Well, great, what are we going to do? We're stuck here. I mean, we're both afraid to even just get out of the car. What should we do?" And this was, 1999, the days before anybody had a cell phone, or before most people had a cell phone. Certainly a couple of kids who had just graduated from high school did not have a cell phone at that point. So we decided we had to just sit there and wait until somebody happened to come along that road to help us out. It was kind of our only choice. So we kind of settled in. We're both sort of grumbling at each other still, because I was 100% certain I had seen those headlights coming directly at us, and she was 100% certain that there had been no headlights at all. After a while, a man started walking up the road toward us, kind of waving and sort of looking a little bit hesitant, and she kind of sticks her head out the window and starts speaking to him, and they're speaking in Spanish. My friend Devin is fluent in Spanish. I don't know a word of Spanish, unfortunately. And this guy was one of the workers on one of the nearby farms. So he said that he had seen, or she told me later that he had told her, obviously in Spanish, that he had seen our car go off the road and had called for help, so a tow truck would be coming on the way soon. And of course she was like, "Oh, thank you," and they just kind of sat there chatting as my friend's smoking her cigarette, and I'm sitting there not knowing what's going on in the conversation. Well, eventually, the tow truck shows up, pulls us back onto the road, so we were okay to keep going. They checked over the car and said it should drive just fine, and the Mexican gentleman who'd helped us, said goodbye and stay safe, and went on his way back into the night. So we start driving back toward my apartment without our movie, too afraid to go find the video store at this point. And after a while, Devin kind of looks at me and she says, "I asked him, since he said he saw our car go off the road, if he saw the truck that came at us. And he looked at me kind of funny and he said, 'There was no truck. I saw your headlights coming down the road, and I saw you swerve suddenly and then end up hanging over the ditch, but there was no truck.' So I guess it was 2 versus 1. The farmhand and my friend Devin both voted that there was no truck, but I am absolutely certain still to this day that we almost got hit by something, some crazy lights that were heading straight for us. Maybe there was something trying to drive us off the road, and they almost succeeded. I don't know. It was pretty scary, but to this day, my friend Devin still reminds me of that story, too. And I guess that's all I have, so I hope this makes it onto the Halloween show, and to all you Anything Ghost fans out there, take care!
My name is Joseph, and my family and I, my wife and our 4 kids, live in Mount Forest, Ontario, Canada. However, about 13 years ago, we bought a century home that we lived in for around 5 years. And it was in a small town north of Toronto, Ontario, called Sunderland. Now, the home that we bought was a 2.5-story Victorian red brick house. 2.5 stories insofar as it had a partially finished attic. And the attic had windows, and the house looked like a spooky old haunted house. It was on an acre of land. As soon as we moved in, everybody in town told us, this house is haunted. You've got ghosts in your house. I was a bit of a cynic back then. My wife really wanted to believe in ghosts so badly that just made me kind of overcompensate, and I was even that much more of a cynic because she just wanted so badly to see something or believe something was in our house. And so she'd tell me from time to time I'm hearing noises or I saw something strange, and I would just kind of disregard it because I knew that she was very biased in favor of finding ghosts. The first night that we stayed in the house, however, there was something that I was in denial about, but I just could not dispute. And that was my wife and I stayed, the day we moved into the house, we decided to stay in the house and sleep there. We set up our bedroom. And we left our kids with my in-laws, the grandparents, because the logic was we wanted to set up their rooms and unpack everything first. So when the kids came up to the house the next day, it wouldn't be such a culture shock for them. Everything would be unpacked. So we were laying in bed and just dozing off after a hard day of heavy lifting and moving all sorts of boxes and luggage into this new house. And we could hear smacking and cracking and footsteps and door handles and all sorts of sounds throughout the house, creaking and floorboards and you name it. Several times I got up out of bed, ran down the hall, ran downstairs because I thought there must be some neighbors messing with us or maybe some local kids thought they would have a bit of fun with the new owners of the house. We were hearing sounds such as footsteps coming up the front porch outside to the front door, the sound of the door handle moving, and then the steps continuing in the house up the stairs, and they'd go right to the doorway of our bedroom. After a couple of hours of this, I had gotten out of our bed so many times to investigate these noises in the darkness that I said to my wife, I don't care what we hear the rest of the night, I'm just not getting out of bed. And the noises stopped. Now, over the months as we were living there, something did occur that was very strange, which was this. I started to hear voices from time to time in the house. So, for example, one day I was alone in the house. I was listening to Christmas carols, and I was sitting in the bath and reading a book. It was a snowy winter evening, and above the carols, in the hallway outside the bathroom, I could hear men's voices, as though there were 2 or 3 guys speaking with very deep voices right outside the bathroom door. The door was open because I was home alone. My wife and the kids were down at the grandparents'. And so I would get out of the bath and I would turn down the CD player that at the time was playing the Christmas carols, and the voices would stop. And then as soon as I turned the CD player back up again and I would get in the bath, I could hear the voices again. In fact, when I first heard them, I thought, somebody's in my house. Maybe there's firemen or somebody who've come into my home because there's an emergency. Why would there be grown men in my hallway outside my bathroom door? So a couple of times I had to get out of the bath and turn the volume down, and then I thought, okay, either I'm hearing things or something is happening in this house that is messing with me. And there were other occurrences. My wife and I both started to compare notes because when we were watching TV in our master bedroom, at least 3 or 4 times a minute, out of the corner of our eye in the doorway of the bedroom that led out into the hall, we would see these shadowy figures blink by, and that's the best way I could describe it, blink by the bedroom door. And so you would scratch your eyes and think, is there an eyelash in my eye? What's going on? Is there something in the corner of my eye that I keep seeing this dark shadow blink or flutter by the doorway? And what would happen is as soon as you look directly at the doorway, you wouldn't see them. But out of the corner of your eye, you could see them. And so this happened quite frequently, and it started to increase. In other words, the more we saw them, the more frequently they would appear. And one time my wife and I were watching TV in the bedroom, and we were talking about this, and she was saying, I'm seeing them. And I said, yeah, I'm seeing them too. And then one of the shadowy figures blinked by the door very quickly, and before I could say anything to my wife, she said to me, did you see that one? And I said, yeah, I did. I was just about to ask you if you saw it. So it wasn't just me seeing it. It couldn't possibly be something in my eyes. Our children started telling us that they were seeing a little girl in white pajamas in the house. And that really started to spook us. One evening, I was watching television at about 11 o'clock at night in our living room downstairs, and my children were all tucked up in bed, and my wife had gone to bed, and I was alone downstairs just watching television. And off the corner of the banister, I could see through the upstairs banister because there was a foyer in the Century home. From where I was sitting in the living room, I could see out the doorway to just the top of where the stairs turned around, cornered, and went towards my daughter's bedroom. And at the top of the banister, out of the corner of my eye, I see a blonde-haired little girl in pajamas leaning over the banister. Now, both my daughters were blonde-haired. So as soon as I saw this out of the corner of my eye, I said, get to bed, because I thought it was one of my daughters peeking over to see what Dad was doing. And the little figure very slowly leaned back out of my vision. Now, what I normally would hear if one of my daughters was at the top of the stairs is I would have heard their footsteps because it was an old creaky house. And I would have heard her footsteps go back to the bedroom, which was directly above the living room, and I would have heard the bed springs as she got into bed, but I heard nothing. After I said, get to bed, and the little blonde figure leaned back over the banister, I heard nothing. So I got up. I proceeded to start to stand up from the couch because I thought, one of the girls is standing at the top of the banister just outside of my vision. She obviously hasn't gotten back into bed yet. So I go to stand up, and just as I do, the little blonde figure comes flashing, sliding down the stairs in a flash, in a standing position as though the stairs are an escalator. Without going up and down as though she's stepping downstairs, she glides down the stairs. And immediately I jump because I'm thinking one of my kids has just come down the stairs, probably skiing down on her heels, and has fallen at the bottom. And I get up and I run out to the foyer, and there's nobody there. There's no little girl. But as clear as day, I saw this figure gliding quickly down the stairs, and then it occurred to me, it made no noise. This little girl who glided down the stairs made no noise, no thumping, no bumping, no creaking, no sliding on her heels, nothing. She glided down the stairs and vanished. And I run out into the foyer, nobody's there, and a chill runs up my spine, and I realize this house is haunted. There is definitely something going on here. Shortly thereafter, my wife had been for some time suggesting that we get these mediums to come in and cleanse the house. We also had a priest bless the house, and we're a very spiritual family. So we're a family of prayer. We have a lot of religious artifacts and crucifixes in the house. We bless the house ourselves quite frequently and smudge it. So we never ever felt unwelcome. We never felt an evil presence. There's many times I stayed alone in that house while my wife took our kids down to the grandparents and visited. I never felt unwelcome in the house or that something was menacing, but definitely the house was haunted. And so after that incident with the little girl, that's when I said to my wife, yes, I think we should get these mediums to come in and cleanse the house, which we did. The mediums came in. There was I believe there was 3 of them, if memory serves. They came into the house. They did not want to know any details up front. They said, don't tell us anything. Let us do what we have to do, and we will tell you. And they spent, I think a few hours going room to room, cleansing the house. And then they came back and they told us what they found in terms of ghosts in the house. There was a little girl in the house. There also was a gentleman in the house who was an elderly gentleman, spirit, who they said was very fond of our children and was very much in approval with how we were raising our kids, but they said he's grown too fond of them. He's too close to them. And so they asked him to leave. Now, interestingly, they would take no money for their services. When we asked them if they wanted something for their time that they spent cleansing the house, they said, just give us perhaps $20 for gas. And that was it. They did not want to be paid because they felt that would betray the intent and purpose of what they did. After they left, we never experienced any happenings in the house again. It just had a general sense of spaciousness and light and cleanliness, and the house just felt legitimately cleansed. However, that was our experience with our haunted house in Sunderland, Ontario. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of many of the stories of our experiences there, and I can genuinely say that I definitely was converted in terms of my belief in ghosts.
I hope you enjoyed Anything Ghost podcast episode number 311. Number 312 will be in the works soon. If you want to be a part of that, send it to anythingghost@yahoo.com or visit the website anythingghost.com and fill out the form for contact. Thanks for dropping by and take care.